My new baby was sleeping quietly in the hospital bed. He was wrapped in a soft blanket. He wasn't crying. He was just resting like a tiny newborn should. Then HOA Karen came into the room. She started yelling about hospital rules and visiting times. She got louder and angrier. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed a big pot of hot soup she brought. She dumped the boiling water straight onto my baby. The hot liquid burned his tiny body. He screamed in pain. My wife screamed too. Steam went everywhere. The machine started beeping like crazy. Karen stood there with a smile, thinking no one could touch her. She had no idea, not even a little, that the man running down the hall to the room is the police chief and her father. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe for more stories where the bad guys always regret their choices. My new baby was sleeping quietly in the hospital bed. The room was calm in the way only hospital rooms ever are. Soft lights, steady machines, quiet footsteps in the hallway. Everything felt controlled, safe, predictable. He was wrapped in a soft blanket, tucked in carefully by the nurse just minutes earlier. His tiny chest rose and fell in a slow, gentle rhythm. Each breath felt like a promise that everything was going to be okay. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He was just resting, the way a newborn should. My wife sat beside the bed, exhausted but smiling, the kind of smile that comes from relief, from finally seeing your child after months of worry and waiting. Her hand rested lightly near him, afraid to disturb his sleep. We whispered when we spoke. We didn't want to wake him. Nothing about that moment felt dangerous. Then HOA Karen came into the room. She didn't knock. She didn't pause at the door. She walked in like she owned the place. Her heels clicked loudly against the hospital floor, sharp sounds that immediately felt wrong in a room meant for healing. She glanced around with disapproval, her eyes narrowing as if she were inspecting a violation instead of a newborn child. She started yelling about hospital rules, about visiting times, about how people never follow procedures. Her voice echoed too loudly in the small room. My wife flinched. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake. I tried to speak. I told her she had the wrong room. I told her to lower her voice. Karen didn't listen. She got louder. Her words tumbled out fast and angry, stacked with complaints and entitlement. She pointed at the bed. She pointed at the chair. She gestured toward the machines like they offended her. "This is unacceptable," she snapped. "You can't just do whatever you want in a hospital." My wife stood up slowly, still weak from delivery, holding one hand against the bed for balance. "Please," she said quietly, "our baby is sleeping." That should have been enough. It wasn't. Karen's face hardened. She looked around the room and noticed the large pot of soup she had brought. Still hot, still steaming slightly from the lid. It had been sitting untouched near the counter. No one understood what she was thinking. No one had time to react. Before anyone could stop her, Karen grabbed the pot. She didn't hesitate. She didn't warn. She dumped it forward, toward the bed. The hot liquid spilled out in a sudden rush, splashing across the blankets. Everything happened at once. The baby screamed. Not a normal cry, but a sharp, piercing sound filled with pain and terror. A sound so wrong it made my heart stop. My wife screamed too. Her scream was pure panic, the kind that tears itself out of your chest without permission. She lunged forward, reaching for our baby, but slipped, collapsing against the side of the bed. Steam rose into the air. The machines started beeping wildly. Alarms triggered, sounds overlapping, flashing lights demanding attention. The calm room became chaos in seconds. Nurses shouted from the hallway, footsteps pounded closer, and Karen stood there, still. She didn't scream. She didn't look shocked. She stood there with a smile, a small one, satisfied, like she had just proven a point, like no one could touch her, like rules protected her more than humanity ever could. For a moment, she looked around as if expecting applause, or silence, or fear. She believed she had power here. She believed this would be ignored. She believed she was untouchable. She had no idea, not even a little, that the sound echoing down the hallway wasn't just alarms. It was footsteps, heavy, fast, relentless. The man running down the hall toward that room wasn't just any visitor. He wasn't just a grandfather. He wasn't just a worried family member. He was the police chief, and he was her father. He didn't slow down. He didn't ask questions. Every step was fueled by one thought: get to the room. Karen still hadn't turned around. She still didn't understand. The room exploded into motion. For one frozen second after the scream, no one moved. Not because they didn't care, but because the human mind sometimes refuses to accept what it has just seen. The sound of a newborn screaming in pain is not something the brain expects. It doesn't fit into any normal frame of reference. Then reality crashed all at once. Nurses rushed through the door, their calm training breaking into urgency the moment they saw the bed. One of them shouted for assistance before she even crossed the room. Another reached for the baby without hesitation, lifting him gently but quickly. Her movements practiced and precise. "Clear the area!" someone yelled. Alarms screamed from the machines, overlapping tones creating a sharp, panicked chorus. Red lights flashed. The once quiet room felt too small, too loud, too bright. My wife was crying uncontrollably now, not loud sobs, the kind that come from deep shock, where the body forgets how to breathe properly. She tried to stand again, nearly falling as a nurse steadied her. "It's okay, we've got him," the nurse said firmly, though her eyes betrayed the seriousness of the moment. The baby's cries cut through everything. Sharp, desperate, endless. Each sound felt like it was tearing something apart inside me. Steam lingered in the air, slowly fading, but the damage to the moment was permanent. The soft blanket lay soaked and discarded. The peaceful scene from minutes ago was gone, replaced by chaos and fear. Doctors poured in. Someone grabbed gloves. Someone shouted for cooling supplies. Someone else called for the neonatal team. Orders were given quickly, clearly, without hesitation. The staff moved like a single body, trained for emergencies, but even they knew. Head shaken, and Karen stood near the wall, still, silent, watching. Her expression hadn't changed. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't backing away. She looked annoyed, like the room was overreacting. "I told you," she said loudly, cutting through the chaos. "This is what happens when people don't follow rules." Several heads snapped toward her. A nurse stared at her in disbelief. A doctor clenched his jaw so tightly the muscles jumped. Security guards who had arrived at the doorway froze in place, trying to understand what they were seeing. "You need to step out of the room," one of the nurses said sharply, pointing toward the door. Karen scoffed. "Excuse me?" she said. "I have every right to be here. This family was violating hospital policy." The words sounded unreal in the moment. Violating policy. A guard finally found his voice. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "did you pour that on the baby?" Karen didn't answer right away. She crossed her arms. "I brought soup," she said flatly. If people hadn't been breaking visiting rules, none of this would have happened. The room went silent for half a second. Not because things had calmed, but because everyone had heard her clearly. A nurse whispered, "Oh my God." My wife let out a broken sound somewhere between a cry and a gasp. I felt my hands shaking, not from fear, from the effort it took not to move. The doctor turned toward Karen, his voice controlled but dangerous in its calm. "You need to leave, now." Karen laughed, a short, dismissive laugh. "You can't talk to me like that," she said. You are done," the doctor cut in. "Security, remove her from the room." The guard stepped forward at last. Karen took a step back, suddenly offended. "Don't touch me," she snapped. "I was enforcing order." The guards didn't argue. They took her by the arms, firm but professional, guiding her toward the door. Karen resisted just enough to make a point, her heels scraping loudly against the floor. "This is discrimination," she shouted. "People like this never follow rules." Her voice echoed down the hallway as the door swung shut behind her. Inside the room, the fight to stabilize my baby continued. The nurses worked quickly, carefully, every movement deliberate. The doctor spoke in short, clear commands. No one wasted a second. I stood there uselessly, watching, my mind stuck between panic and disbelief. My wife clutched my arm so tightly it hurt, as if letting go would cause everything to disappear. The baby's cries softened slightly, though they never fully stopped. Each sound still hurt. A nurse looked up at us briefly. "He's stable for now," she said. "We're moving him to neonatal care." The words "for now" echoed ominously. They wheeled him out of the room, surrounded by staff, machines rolling alongside the bed. We followed as far as we were allowed, then stopped as doors closed between us. The hallway felt unreal. People stared. Whispers followed us. Someone pointed. Karen was still there, held between two security guards. Her posture had changed slightly now, less confident, more alert. She watched the doors where the baby had disappeared, her mouth pressed into a thin line. She didn't look scared. She looked irritated, like things had gotten inconvenient. "That's your fault," she said suddenly, pointing toward us. "If you'd followed the rules—" I took a step forward. One of the guards moved instantly, blocking her view. "That's enough," he said sharply. Karen rolled her eyes. "This place is a joke," she muttered. "You'll hear from the HOA." A nurse who had followed us into the hallway stopped dead. She turned slowly. "There is no rule," the nurse said, her voice trembling with anger, "that allows you to hurt a child." Karen looked at her like she was stupid. "The nurse." E continued, louder now. "There is no policy. There is no excuse. And you smiled." That last sentence landed hard. Karen's expression flickered for the first time. Not guilt, annoyance. Sirens began to wail faintly in the distance. Karen heard them. Her head turned sharply. "What's that?" she asked. No one answered. The sound grew closer. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. Fast, heavy, purposeful. Staff moved aside instinctively. A presence was coming. Karen straightened her posture, lifting her chin again, preparing herself the way she always did, like authority was a shield she could raise at will. She still believed she could talk her way out. She still believed titles mattered more than actions. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The footsteps were almost there now, and everyone in that hallway could feel it. The sound reached him before anyone said a word. It wasn't a voice he heard first. It wasn't shouting or alarms. It was instinct. A pressure in the chest. A tightening behind the eyes. The kind of pull that yanks a person forward before thought has time to form. The police chief had learned to trust that feeling long ago. It had kept him alive. It had kept others alive. Now it dragged him down a hospital hallway at full speed. His shoes struck the polished floor in hard, echoing beats. Nurses flattened themselves against the walls as he passed. A doctor turned, startled, then stepped aside without asking questions. Everyone could tell by the way he moved. This was not a man rushing for information. This was a man rushing for blood. "Sir," someone tried to call out. He didn't slow. The hallway stretched ahead of him, too long, too narrow, every second screaming that it was 1 second too many. His hand brushed the wall once as he rounded a corner, using it to pivot faster, his breath steady, controlled, measured. Training held the rage. In place, barely. Then he saw the room. The door stood open. Staff clustered near it. Security was present now. 2 guards holding a woman between them. Karen. She was still talking. Still loud, still convinced the world revolved around her mouth. "This is completely blown out of proportion," she snapped. "I was enforcing rules. You can't detain me." The police chief crossed the final distance in 3 strides. The hallway seemed to quiet around him. Not because the noise stopped, but because every sound suddenly felt smaller in comparison. Conversations died mid-sentence. A nurse's hand froze on a clipboard. Karen turned at the sound of his footsteps. For half a second, she looked confused, then offended. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded. "You can't just—" "Step away from her," the police chief said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The guards instantly obeyed, loosening their grip and stepping back a pace, recognition flashing across their faces. They had seen him before, on the news, at briefings, in command rooms. Authority wasn't something he announced. It followed him. Karen stared at him, blinking. "You can't order people around in a hospital," she snapped. "This family violated policy." The police chief didn't look at her right away. He looked past her, through the open door. He saw his daughter, collapsed into a chair, pale, shaking. Her hands clenched so tightly together her knuckles were white. He saw the empty bed behind her, the discarded blanket, the frantic movement of staff just beyond the next set of doors. He understood everything in less than a second. He turned back to Karen. "Your name," he said. Karen scoffed. I don't have to give you anything. I'm HOA. Your name, he repeated, one step closer. The hallway felt smaller suddenly. Karen's confidence wavered. Not gone, but cracked. Karen, she said sharply, and you are interfering. NG with my authority. The police chief reached into his jacket and pulled out his badge. He didn't thrust it forward. He didn't wave it around. He held it steady, at chest height, where she couldn't avoid seeing it. I'm the police chief, he said, and you just assaulted a newborn. The words didn't land all at once. Karen's mouth opened, closed. She laughed once. Short and forced. That's ridiculous, she said. I didn't assault anyone. It was an accident. The police chief didn't raise his voice. An accident doesn't come with a smile, he said. A nurse nearby inhaled sharply. Karen's head snapped toward the nurse. That's a lie. The nurse didn't back down. She smiled, the nurse said clearly. She didn't ask for help. She didn't show concern. She smiled. Karen's face tightened. That's not what happened, she insisted, but her voice had changed now. Less sharp, more brittle. The police chief stepped closer still. Do you know what happens next? He asked calmly. Karen swallowed. You're going to tell your lawyer, he continued, that you are enforcing rules. And then you're going to hear the charges. Her eyes darted to the guards, to the nurses, to the small crowd that had gathered at the far end of the hall. Phones were out. People were recording. No, Karen said quickly. This is being misunderstood. I brought soup. I didn't mean... You brought a weapon into a neonatal room, the police chief said. Intent will be decided later. Right now, we're dealing with facts. He turned slightly. Cuff her. The guards didn't hesitate. Karen recoiled. You can't do this. You don't have jurisdiction here. The cuffs closed around her wrists. The sound was unmistakable. Final. Karen gasped as if the air had been punched out of her. This is insane, she shouted. You're overreacting. The police chief leaned in just enough for her to hear him alone. You hurt my grands. On, he said quietly. You're lucky this ends in cuffs. Karen stopped shouting. Her face drained of color. She was led away from the doorway, past the room, past the staff who had watched her moments earlier. Her heels dragged now. Her posture collapsed inward. As she passed the police chief's daughter, Karen looked away. She couldn't meet her eyes. The police chief didn't follow immediately. He turned back to his daughter. He knelt in front of her, placing a steady hand over hers. She looked up at him, eyes red, unfocused, terrified. He's alive, she whispered. I know, he said softly. I'm here. She nodded, clinging to his hand like a lifeline. Down the hallway, Karen's voice faded as she was taken toward an exit. The hospital slowly began to breathe again, but nothing would ever feel the same. Not for Karen, not for the family, and not for the man who had just sprinted down a hallway and arrived, 1 second too late, but still in time to make sure it never happened again. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It slips. Slowly, quietly, one piece at a time. Karen felt it the moment the handcuffs closed around her wrists. Not fear, not yet, confusion. Her entire life had been built on a simple truth she believed without question. If she spoke loudly enough, if she acted confident enough, people would back down. They always had. Neighbors, parents, employees, security guards. Authority had never been challenged before. Not like this. As she was guided down the hallway, Karen tried to straighten her posture. She lifted her chin, rolled her shoulders back, and forced her voice to stay sharp. This is completely unnecessary, she said loudly. You're all making a mistake. No one answered. The hospital corridor felt different now. Not just quieter, watchful. Nurses stood still, their faces unreadable. Doctors paused mid-step. Families peered out from doorways, drawn by instinct toward the disturbance. They saw the cuffs. They saw who wore them. And they understood. Karen noticed the looks, not the fear she was used to, but something colder, judgment. She tried again. I want to file a complaint, she snapped. I know my rights. Still nothing. A security guard opened a side door leading to a restricted waiting area. Karen was guided inside and seated. The chair felt hard, unforgiving. Her wrists ached where the metal pressed into her skin. She looked around, searching for a face that might sympathize. There were none. Down the hall, behind closed doors, machines continued to beep. Staff moved with quiet urgency. Life and death were still happening, just not around her anymore. That realization struck deeper than she expected. She was no longer the center of attention. Minutes passed. Then more. The police chief returned. He didn't rush this time. He walked, measured, controlled, calm. That frightened Karen more than shouting ever could. He stood across from her, not towering, not aggressive, just present. His presence filled the space without effort. "You're going to listen now," he said quietly. Karen scoffed, but her voice lacked its old edge. "I've already explained myself." "You've talked," he replied. "Now you'll listen." She fell silent. "Your authority," he continued, "ended the moment you decided rules mattered more than a child's life." Karen opened her mouth to argue. He raised one finger. Not another word. She froze. "I've reviewed preliminary statements," he said. "Staff, security, witnesses, video." Her eyes flickered. "There is no version of events where this ends well for you." Karen swallowed. "This is harassment," she said weakly. "You're abusing your power." The police chief's expression didn't change. "No," he said. "I'm preventing you from ever abusing yours again." He turned slightly as an officer entered. "The room with the tablet. HOA records," the officer said. "Background complaints." Karen's breath caught. The officer continued, reading calmly. "Multiple written complaints. Threatening language, prior incidents involving intimidation. No criminal charges. Until today." Karen shook her head. "Those people were liars," she insisted. "They just didn't like rules." The police chief looked at her for a long moment. "Rules are meant to protect," he said, "not terrorize." Another officer entered. "Hospital administration has revoked her access permanently," he said. "She's banned from all facilities." Karen's head snapped up. "You can't do that." "They already did," the officer replied. Her hands curled into fists inside the cuffs. Piece by piece, the reality pressed in. No badge, no clipboard, no backing. Just consequences. "HOA board has been contacted," the police chief said. "They're cooperating." Karen laughed. A hollow, brittle sound. "They won't dare," she said. "I built that board." The police chief met her eyes. "They've already removed you." Silence crashed down. Karen's mouth opened, closed. She shook her head slowly, as if saying the words might undo them. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." "It is," he said. "And it's done." Something broke then, not loudly, internally. Karen's shoulders sagged. Her breathing quickened. She looked smaller now. Not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had just realized the armor they'd worn for years had never been real. "This isn't fair," she said quietly. The police chief leaned forward slightly. "Fairness ended when you crossed a line you can't uncross." Outside the room, staff watched through the glass, not with curiosity, with relief. The officer returned again. "Charges are being filed," he said. "Multiple counts." Karen didn't ask which ones. She already knew. She stared at the floor, for the first time. Since she'd entered the hospital, she didn't speak. She was escorted out shortly after. No shouting this time. No demands. Just slow, heavy steps. As she passed through the hospital exit, sunlight hit her face. It felt wrong, like the world hadn't gotten the message yet. Behind her, the doors closed. Inside, the police chief returned to his family. His daughter sat in a quiet room now, holding a cup of water she hadn't touched. She looked up when he entered. "They took her away?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "He's still being treated," he continued. "Doctors are doing everything." She nodded. That was enough. Power had changed hands, not violently, not dramatically, but permanently. Karen would never again walk into a room and expect silence. Never again raise her voice and watch people shrink. Never again confuse authority with cruelty. Because power, once exposed, doesn't come back. And this time, it was gone for good. The hospital never truly sleeps. Even in the quietest hours, there is motion. Carts rolling softly, doors opening and closing, footsteps moving with purpose. But that night, the rhythm changed. It slowed. It sharpened. Every sound seemed to carry farther. as if the building itself was paying attention. Karen felt it as she was escorted through the corridor. The cuffs were tight but not painful, cold metal against warm skin. Each step reminded her that this wasn't a warning, this wasn't a conversation, this was custody. She tried to speak again as they passed a nurse's station. "I want to make a statement," she said quickly. "This is all being exaggerated." No one responded. An officer guided her around a corner and toward a set of elevators reserved for staff and emergency use. The doors stood open, waiting. Karen hesitated, digging in her heels just enough to signal resistance without making it obvious. "I didn't hurt anyone," she insisted. "There were no injuries." The officer stopped and turned to face her. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you will have an opportunity to speak with counsel. Right now, you're being transported." The doors closed with a soft chime. Inside the elevator, the air felt heavy. Too close, too quiet. Karen stared at her reflection in the polished metal walls. She didn't recognize the woman looking back at her, hair disheveled, eyes darting, jaw clenched. She tried to lift her chin, to restore the posture she had practiced for years. Authority posture. It didn't work anymore. The elevator opened onto a secured wing near the emergency exit. Another officer waited there with paperwork in hand. He glanced at Karen, then at the cuffs, then back to the officer escorting her. "Charges are being prepared," he said. "Hospital administration has formally requested arrest on site." Karen laughed once, sharp and hollow. "You can't arrest me here," she said. "This is a hospital." The officer didn't look up from the clipboard. "It's also a public facility," he replied. "With cameras." Karen's laughter stopped. They moved her to a small, glass-walled room near the exit. It wasn't an interrogation room, just a place to wait. A bench, a table, a camera in the corner blinking steadily. Outside the glass, people passed by, staff, security, families. Some glanced in, some didn't. Those who did recognized her. Whispers followed. "That's her. That's the woman." "She did it here?" Karen heard every word. She lowered herself onto the bench slowly, wrists aching as she adjusted her position. Time stretched. Minutes passed without conversation. Then the police chief entered. He didn't bring anger with him. That was the worst part. He brought certainty. He stopped just inside the doorway, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes steady. Karen looked up at him, searching for something. Rage, grief, desperation, anything she could use. She found none. "You're being formally arrested," he said calmly. "On multiple charges." Karen shook her head. "You're doing this because it's personal," she said. "That's abuse of power." The police chief tilted his head slightly. "This is being done because of evidence," he replied. "Personal feelings don't change facts." He placed a folder on the table and opened it. "Video from the hallway," he continued. "Statements from 5 staff members, 2 security officers, hospital administration, medical documentation." Karen looked away. "You don't understand pressure," she muttered. "People don't listen unless you push." The police chief leaned forward just enough to meet her eyeline. "Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty," he said. "And rules don't justify harm." Karen's lips trembled. For a moment it looked like she might cry. Then the door opened again. An officer entered with a radio. "Transport is ready," he said. "Media's already outside." Karen's head snapped up. "Media?" she repeated. "You told them?" The officer didn't answer. The police chief closed the folder. "Everything that happens next," he said, "will be documented." Karen stood on unsteady legs. As they walked her toward the exit, she could hear the murmur outside. Voices overlapping, cameras clicking, reporters calling out questions. The doors opened. Light flooded in. Flash, flash, flash. "Ma'am. Is it true you injured a newborn? Were you enforcing HOA rules? Do you regret your actions?" Karen turned her face away, shielding it as best she could with cuffed hands. "No comment," she shouted. "This is a setup." Her words were swallowed by the noise. She was guided down the steps and into the patrol car. The door closed. The engine started. Inside, the noise faded. For the first time since she entered the hospital, Karen was alone. No audience, no authority, no escape. Back inside, the hospital resumed its work. Doctors continued their rounds. Nurses checked charts. Life went on, because it had to. The police chief returned to the neonatal unit. His daughter sat quietly now, eyes red but focused, listening to a doctor explain the next steps. When she saw him, she stood immediately. "She's gone?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "She won't be back." Her shoulders sagged with relief. The doctor nodded respectfully at the police chief. "We'll keep monitoring," he said. "Your grandson is stable." The word stable felt like a lifeline. The police chief placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You did everything right," he said softly. She nodded, tears finally falling freely. Outside, the patrol car pulled away from the hospital. Karen watched the building shrink in the window, her reflection faintly visible over it. For years, she had walked into places like that, expecting control. Now, she was leaving without it, and there would be no returning. The hospital felt different in the days that followed. Not quieter, hospitals are never quiet, but heavier. Every hallway carried memory now. Every closed door reminded us how quickly peace can shatter. The same machines still beeped. The same carts still rolled past. But for our family, time no longer moved the same way. My grandson remained in neonatal care, surrounded by wires, by careful hands, by people who spoke softly, even when they didn't need to. Doctors were honest with us. They didn't promise miracles. They promised effort, vigilance, and truth. And for now, that was enough. My daughter rarely left his side. She sat for hours, watching his tiny chest rise and fall, whispering words he couldn't yet understand. Sometimes she cried quietly. Sometimes she just stared, as if blinking might make something worse happen. I stayed close, not as a police chief, not as authority, as a father, as a grandfather. The investigation moved faster than most. It had to. Too many witnesses, too many cameras, too much evidence. Hospital footage showed Karen entering the room uninvited. Audio confirmed raised voices. Staff statements aligned. Security reports matched timelines down to the minute. And then there was the detail no one could ignore. Multiple witnesses confirmed the same thing. She smiled. That single fact followed her everywhere. It appeared in reports, in depositions, in quiet conversations between attorneys. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was revealing. Karen's lawyer tried. He argued stress. He argued misunderstanding. He argued intent. None of it held. There is no justification for harming a child. There is no policy that excuses cruelty. There is no authority that overrides humanity. The charges were finalized within days. Serious ones, not symbolic, not negotiable. Karen was denied bail. The courtroom was full on the day of the hearing, not with reporters, though they were there, but with people who had been waiting years to see her held accountable. Former neighbors, hospital staff, people who had once stayed silent. My daughter testified. Her voice shook at first, then it steadied. She didn't dramatize. She didn't exaggerate. She told the truth, and the truth was enough. When the judge spoke, there was no anger in his voice, only certainty. The defendant abused perceived authority, he said, and caused irreparable harm. The sentence was firm. Consequences were real. Karen cried. Not quiet tears, angry ones. She looked around the courtroom as if expecting someone, anyone, to rescue her. No one did. She was led away without ceremony. No shouting, no speeches, no power left to perform. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Karen kept her head down. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere to look that gave her control. Back at the hospital, my grandson slowly improved, day by day, not quickly, but steadily. The first time he slept peacefully again, my daughter held her breath the entire time, afraid that peace might be temporary. The nurse smiled gently. "He's stronger than he looks," she said. Those words mattered. Weeks later, we brought him home. The house felt too quiet at first, then too loud, then just right. Life didn't snap back into place. It adjusted. Slowly, carefully. Karen never returned to the neighborhood. The HOA dissolved its enforcement committee entirely. Policies were rewritten. Oversight was added. Authority was restrained, not because they suddenly cared, but because they were afraid not to. My daughter still has moments. Sometimes loud voices make her tense. Sometimes hospitals make her pause at the door. Healing isn't a straight line, but it is happening. One evening, months later, I held my grandson as the sun set through the living room window. He slept peacefully against my chest, warm and alive. My daughter sat across from me, watching him. "Dad," she said quietly. "Yes? She can't hurt anyone again, right?" I looked at her. "No," I said. "She can't." She nodded. That was enough. Justice doesn't erase pain. It doesn't undo fear, but it draws a line, and once that line is crossed, there are consequences. Karen crossed it, and the world answered, not with chaos, not with revenge, but with accountability. And sometimes, that is the strongest ending of all.